So we're just going to go ahead and get right into it. Danny's going to start the recording. Perfect. So I just want to start off by saying good evening. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Katie Broughton. I'm the Director of Authorizing for the SPCSA. Melissa may be joining us later. She's at a Title II meeting, but the rest of the authorizing leads are here to talk about the different arms of the framework individually. So they'll kind of be here to lead their different sections of the framework trainings. But we're just going to go ahead and get started. This training does run just like almost exactly an hour. So we want to honor everybody's time. And then there is an opportunity after we go over each portion of the framework for questions. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of waiting, if you have like academic framework questions, waiting till the end of that, and then we can take any questions, and then we'll do the same for organizational and for financial. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we're going to start by talking about the purpose of the frameworks, our revision process, and then we'll talk a little bit about an overview of the NSPF, which kind of works hand in hand with the SPCSA's academic framework. We'll go into the organization framework, the financial framework, and then we'll talk about next steps and any additional training that may be necessary. I will say we've got a lot of information to share with you today. It's pretty high level. So if you have specific questions as like you're going through the year or as you're looking through the various technical guides, please feel free to reach out to us. Today, our main focus is to highlight kind of the significant changes that you may see in the frameworks moving forward. But we want to make sure that everybody has kind of high-level details. But if you have further smaller level details as you kind of get into it, please reach out to us. We also just want to say for timeline, the timeline is going to be a little bit awkward for a bit. The frameworks that we're going to talk about today are in effect for the 24-25 school year, so the school year that's happening right now. But the rating cycle for 23-24, which was last school year, is still on the old technical guide. So you'll get organizational, academic, and financial ratings from 23-24 school year based on the old technical guides. And then these frameworks are in place right now, but the first set of ratings will come next fall. So it's just the timeline's a little bit awkward, but hopefully that makes sense. So the purpose of the frameworks is to meet our statutory requirements in NRS 388A.273, which requires each sponsor to adopt a performance framework that includes academic, financial, and organizational components. So we have one of each. It's also meant to provide transparency to our board, schools within the portfolio, and really all public stakeholders regarding the performance of the schools. When we went through the revision process, we contracted with West Ed to help us lead the revision work. They have kind of experience throughout the country and some exposure throughout the country, so we utilized sort of their viewpoint to try to help us revise some of these things. They hosted focus groups in the spring with school leaders, school board members, Opportunity 180, and CSAN to solicit feedback on the frameworks. And then we did our best to incorporate that feedback into the updated version of the frameworks. The SPCSA met with them weekly to analyze feedback and make necessary adjustments to all three versions of the framework. They then hosted focus groups again in the summer to look at the first revisions, collected additional feedback from school leaders, board members, Opportunity 180, the SPCSA board, and then that shaped the final version of the framework that was ultimately approved by the SPCSA board in July. Those were adopted on July 26, 2024, and will be in effect for the 24-25 school year. But again, the first rating cycle for this won't be until next fall. So we're going to start with the academic performance framework, and I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Ozdemir to really get into it. But kind of the process we went through as we reviewed the statute and code to determine what was required by law to be incorporated into the academic performance framework. We looked back at feedback received from various stakeholders. We kind of crosswalked our framework with NACSA's most recent recommendation. And then we looked at some other authorizers, frameworks, and best practices, and tried to also kind of compare where ours was at in comparison to those. We have some pretty important questions that guided the development of this framework. Are we measuring what the law requires us to measure? Do we have outcomes that are charter specific? Do these outcomes measure something that's specific to the community that the charter school's in? Does it add school burden? Are some of these outcomes beyond the control of the school? Is the information clear and concise? And is it aligned to valuing a community-based school? So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Ozdemir from here, but that's kind of a global perspective on the process, and then he'll take it from there.
Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Selçuk Ozdemir, Manager of Academic Performance. During this presentation, I will first talk about the background and Nevada School Performance Framework, known as NSPF. Then I will discuss the details of the SPCSA academic framework and scoring. According to NRS 388A.273, the academic framework must address academic achievement and proficiency, including growth, disparities in academic achievement and proficiency, including growth again, and graduation rates, and college career readiness. All these components are addressed by NSPF school star ratings. Next slide, please. So what is NSPF star rating? The NSPF is the Nevada's public school rating system. It is classifies schools within a 5-star performance rating. In the next couple of slides, I will talk about some details for NSPF, but if you need further details, here in this page, we included some training video links for your information. In addition to NSPF star rating, there is also state's alternative performance framework. This framework is for alternative public or charter schools, such as credit recovery programs, juvenile detention facilities, etc. Please note that in our portfolio, Beacon Academy Charter School is approved under this framework. I believe there are about 30 schools approved for this framework in the state of Nevada, and the most current list can be found on NDE's website. Next slide, please. So NSPF star ratings rates 3 levels of schools: elementary school, middle school, and high school. Each school level is associated with an accountability level. After the calculation, an SPF star rating report is compiled and published for each level of an individual elementary school, middle school, and high school. Let's look at the elementary and middle school level indicators first. The 5 indicators used for the elementary schools and middle schools ratings are academic achievement, growth, English language proficiency, closing opportunity gaps, and student engagement. As you can see, the total points available is 100, and the growth has the highest point here. Next slide, please. High school indicators are a little bit different than elementary and middle schools. The 5 indicators used for high schools are academic achievement, graduation rates, English language proficiency, college and career readiness, and student engagement. Please note that there is no growth indicator in high school level, and graduation rates has the highest points for high school level. Academic achievement, our state uses ACT for this indicator, and college and career readiness, NDE uses AP, IB, dual enrollment, and diploma type for these indicators, are all each 25 points. Next slide, please. So far, we captured an SPF star ratings, which is a state performance framework. Now, I'd like to talk about SPCSA framework principles and scoring before dive into details for the indicators. SPCSA academic framework has 4 performance levels, from below standards to exceed standards, as you can see on the graph located on the right-hand side of the slide. The maximum points possible is 100. Each school earns point on the indicators in the framework according to point attribution tables, PATs, and total framework scores define school performance levels. Another important note is that any school that earns 1 or 2 star rating on the NSPF and does not meet standard or below standard on academic performance framework is subject to issuance or elevation of a notice. Next slide, please. In this slide, we will look at the SPCSA framework as a whole, and then in the next slide, we will discuss individual indicators in detail. Let's look at the SPCSA academic performance indicators closer. This slide explains the backbone of the SPCSA academic framework, so I will go one by one and spend some time on this. Starting from upper left corner, moving left to the right, the first indicator is NSPF index score. This indicator uses corresponding school year NSPF data for SPCSA schools. NSPF index score has the highest weight in our framework, which is 50 points worth. As we discussed previously, NSPF star rating measures proficiency, growth, opportunity gap, student engagement, etc. Moving to the next, the indicator is zip code comparison, which is worth 15 points. This indicator compares NSPF charter school, SPCSA charter school, NSPF performance to that of other public schools within the same zip code. Please note that if you are a 5-star schools, you will receive a 15 automatic points. If you are a 4-star schools, there's a 10 automatic points is available too. Moving to next indicator is chronic absenteeism reduction, which is 5 points. A chronic absenteeism reduction indicator that uses elevates year after year reduction in chronic absenteeism rate for SPCSA schools. Now that we complete to the top part, so I'm moving into the middle section, which is the student group comparison indicator. Similar to state NSPF star rating, this indicator measures 3 levels of schools separately: elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools. Moving to the right, let's look at the elementary and middle school measures. A student group comparison indicator, 30 points, that compares SPCSA school student group performance in ELA and math median growth percentile, MGP. The student groups evaluated under this indicator include English learners, economically disadvantaged students, and students with disabilities. Basically, this indicator compares student group to the local school districts as well as the overall SPCSA school itself. Let's look at the first line under elementary and middle schools measures, which is school EL, ELA, math MGPs versus district EL, ELA, and math MGP. This measure calculates median growth percentile for English learners in SPCSA charter school and compare with this local school district's English learners' performance. For example, this measure will compare EL students' MGP at Las Vegas, let's say a Las Vegas SPCSA charter school with a Clark County School District English learners MGP. Similar calculation will be repeated for economically disadvantaged students, FRL, and students with disabilities, student groups. Let me provide another example. We are still under elementary and middle school measures. Let's look at EL, ELA/math MGP versus overall school ELA/math MGP. This measure calculates median growth percentile for English learners in SPCSA charter school and compares that within an overall school itself. So moving to high school. It is a similar logic for high school, but as I mentioned earlier, the measures are different. High schools are evaluated on 4-year graduation rates. Similar to elementary and middle schools, the student groups evaluated under this indicator include English learners, economically disadvantaged students, and students with disabilities. The last indicator I will mention on this slide is a mission-specific goals indicator, where SPCSA schools provide a narrative describing how they met their mission-specific goals, which are goals that schools incorporate into their charters. This part of the framework is display only and does not earn points on the academic performance framework. Next slide, please. So let's dig a little bit deeper to points and calculations. 50 points on the SPCSA academic performance framework are determined by the NSPF index score. Points displayed on the NSPF are on a 100-point scale and do not directly correspond to the SPCSA. For example, if an SPCSA charter school index score is 90, the calculation will be 90 times 0.5, which equals to 45 points total. Next slide. Student groups comparison indicator. Elementary and middle schools student group comparison indicator contains 12 measures and worth 2.5 points each. Points are awarded based on the difference in MGP per the point attribution tables, as you can see at the upper right corner. For example, if the SPCSA charter schools EL MGP is 57 and the district is 56, the SPCSA charter school will receive 2.5 points for this particular measure. For high school student group, the comparison indicator contains 6 measures. They worth 5 points each. For these indicators, as I mentioned before, SPCSA schools 4-year graduation rates for English language learners, for reduced lunch and IEP students groups. And then the graduation rate for the correspondent student groups for the school districts, which SPCSA school is physically located. And then also there is another comparison, the 4-year graduation rate for all the student group, overall rate for the SPCSA school in question. Next slide, please. Comparison to schools in zip code. This compares the SPCSA schools NSPF index score to average NSPF index score for all rated public schools. Again, school level comparison will be by elementary, middle, and high. This measure takes the SPCSA school zip code location to that of other public schools within the same zip code. For example, if the SPCSA charter school index score is 85 and the average NSPF index score for all rated is 80, the school will receive 8 points according to point attribution table, as you can see on the right-hand side. Another note here, 4-star schools automatically earn 10 points and 5-star schools automatically earn at least 15 points for this indicator. Next slide, please. Chronic absenteeism reduction. Extent to which a charter school decreases its rate of chronic absenteeism year over year. Schools with low chronic absenteeism rates will earn automatic points here in this indicator, and the point attribution table can be seen on the right-hand side. If chronic absenteeism rate is less than 10%, automatic 5 points, or if chronic absenteeism rate is greater than 10 but less than 15, automatic 2.5 points will be assigned under this indicator. Next slide, please. This is a mission-specific goals indicator. As I mentioned, there are no points assigned to this indicator. This indicator is displays only. Mission-specific goal indicators provide schools an opportunity to showcase their uniqueness of their programs. For this indicator, we are going to use the SPCSA Charter School Acing Accountability Goals, unless the schools indicate that they want to use something different, and then you would then just contact us. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions here.
All right, we'll keep moving. I will also just add one thing. This presentation has a bunch of links in it, and I will send these slides out tomorrow morning. So you'll have access to these slides and the content within them as well. Thanks, Selchuk, for that. We'll move on next to the organizational performance framework. We went through a similar process as we updated the organizational performance framework. We reviewed the Nevada State statute and code to determine, again, what is required by law. We reviewed and summarized feedback from our current version of the OPF, and we looked at the NACSA's most recent guidance to kind of provide some compare and contrast. And then we looked at some other authorizers, frameworks, and best practices to see what we were doing and maybe what we could incorporate. Some feedback that we got is that the organizational indicators and weight of the measures are not prioritized based on importance. And as the authorizer, that was something we also had some concern about. The framework has a ton of measures, but it didn't provide a lot of meaningful information to determine the effectiveness of the school's capacity. And schools provided feedback that they found the framework to be difficult to determine, like where they were doing well and what struggles they had. I will say this is the framework that underwent the most significant changes. Academic and financial had some tweaks, but stayed pretty holistically similar. The organizational performance framework changed quite a bit. So this is maybe one that would be worth digging into a little bit more as you're reviewing the technical guide. I'm going to hand it over to Danny, and he's going to get into some of the changes that you will see for this version of the framework.
Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. Danny Peltier. I oversee both the organizational performance framework along with amendments and those type of items for the SPCSA. So this first slide, we're going to go ahead and give an overview of the changes to the SPCSA OPF. One of the main changes that we did was we've moved the financial indicators out of the OPF and placed those under the FPF, which Mike Dang will get into later. Some of the things that we've created to help schools kind of have a better idea of what it is that they're needing to be doing throughout a school year is we've created a compliance checklist with a separate indicator to provide a school's rating specifically on the checklist. We're hoping this allows each compliance standard to be assessed individually and supporting schools and boards in certifying their compliance year over year. We're also signaling the importance of accurate and timely material submissions through this separate category, which will be tied into that compliance checklist. And then beginning in the 25-26 school year, we're going to be adding what we call quality indicators, which we'll get into in a later slide, but we're going to be looking more at the quality of the board governance and the overall education program for each of the charter schools that we oversee. Next slide, please. So what is the organizational framework's purpose? I think, compliance is one of the things that everyone kind of looks at is like, are you turning things in on time? But it defines the operational standards to which all the charter schools should be held accountable for. It enables schools to retain the flexibility and autonomy related to the school's mission, vision, and educational program. And the OPF also examines the legal and ethical requirements for all of the schools. Next slide. So the compliance checklist, this is one of the big major changes that we've added to this iteration of the OPF. So the framework's going to include 4 compliance categories to evaluate a school's organizational performance and compliance. We've also kind of created what we call key submissions. So this is a checklist that includes several submissions that are going to be noted by an asterisk in this checklist that are key to the school's operations across all 4 of the categories to the right. And so those compliance categories that we're looking at are going to be the charter contract. Is the school in compliance with the charter contract? And so what we mean by that is, for example, charter schools have enrollment caps in their charter contracts. Did the school meet that cap, 90% to 110% within that cap? If they were unable to meet it, did they submit an amendment to more or less reduce that cap? Because if you're over the cap, that kind of creates a whole other issue. But that's an example of compliance with the charter contract itself. The governance piece of it, did the board comply with basic governance requirements? And what we're looking for is agenda posting. Did you do that on notice.nv.gov? Was there minutes? Was there a recording? Was the public able to access the meeting without any sort of, issues with giving public comment or those type of things? The third compliance category is the federal and state statute, the administrative code and regulation. So this is going to be regarding education personnel, language and culture, SPED, safety, education, all the aspects of the operations of the school on a day-to-day basis. And then overall operations, does the school submit epicenter tasks on time and accurately? That's going to be something that we've built out the OPF team over the past year, and we're definitely highlighting a more detailed look at the reporting requirements that schools are submitting specifically to OPF, but the overall SPCSA reporting as a whole. Next slide, please. And so we've created some compliance checklist ratings. So each of these standards is rated on the scale that you can see below, and is defined in the technical guide, which you can find on our website. So the meet standard is the threshold for success a school is expected to meet, and no follow-up is needed. So that's reporting requirements. You've submitted things on time. What was submitted was correct, and there's really not a lot that we have to do from our side. Approaching the standard, the school has not fully met the threshold of success for standard. So maybe some documents are submitted past due, or there are some corrections that need to be made when we reach out to the schools. And then we will follow up with each of the schools in order to correct those. And then does not meet is the school failed to comply in the manner described materially. Basically, you missed the deadline, but then the report wasn't turned in. We've seen that over the past few years where maybe a school will submit something, we reject it in Epicenter because there's some corrections that need to be made, and then no follow-up is done, and the report overall has failed to be submitted. Next slide. So the overall organizational framework rating. So this is all the 4 categories that I spoke about before. So in compliance, all the requirements in the checklist are meet standard or meets the standard by assurances. Partially compliant, 1 or more of the requirements are rated as approaches standard or meets standard by assurances. And then out of compliance is going to be 1 or more requirements does not meet standard. So the overall organizational performance framework rating, poor organizational performance may trigger or elevate to a notice. Schools that miss a key submission or have a does not meet standard designation may be placed into the intervention ladder. So what we're talking about there is items like, did the school fail to submit its annual audit? That's going to probably place you into a notice. Or did the school fail to submit multiple items on time, or fail to submit, the vast majority of items on time? That may trigger a notice. So looking ahead to the 25-26 school year, this is something that is not being contemplated under this 24-25 iteration of the OPF, but it's something that we're going to be we're doing some testing in it. We're kind of rolling it out slowly so that everyone kind of has an understanding of what this is going to look like going forward. So there's the quality program. It's basically the quality indicators. And so for the first quality indicator, we're looking at the educational program. It's going to assess the school's adherence to material terms of its proposed educational program and the education program aspects required by law. And it's going to be largely measured by the site evaluation. So all of you are well aware our site evaluation teams head out and do 1, 3, 5-year checks, and depending on certain situations, maybe additional site evaluations. But this is where the vast majority of the quality indicators are going to be measured, is through the site evaluations. The other aspect of it is going to be the board governance. So this is going to assess the charter board's compliance with governance-related laws and the board's own bylaws and policies. And this is going to include a measure to evaluate the extent and quality the board oversees duties that are related to the academic, financial, and organizational aspects of the program. In addition to that, we're also going to be looking at, does this school, I said it earlier, but are you meeting OML deadlines, right? So was the agenda posted on the website? Was it submitted in Epicenter? And then was it also posted in notice.nv.gov on time and in compliance with OML? Was it, we've seen areas where the school maybe submits to notice.nv.gov at noon when it should have been at 9 a.m. Now, maybe no one's going to submit a OML violation to the AG's office, but what we're looking for is we're really trying to hone in on that OML compliance and ensuring that notice of a meeting is made to the public, and then at the meeting, the items, is the agenda clear and concise to a member of the public who is looking to attend. And so, what we've seen with agendas recently is we'll see an item on there that just says executive director's report, but there's nothing listed. So if I'm a member of the public and I'm looking at the school's agenda, it just says executive director's report. But then if I go and look at the meeting minutes, there's a lot of items in there that were pretty important to the school. We're going to be looking for the quality of that agenda to kind of lay out more what the school is going to be taking action on or discussing in their meetings. So if I, a parent or whoever, am interested, I know what that board meeting is going to be discussing, and so I can take part in it if I choose to. Next slide. So those are the main changes. I would also note, we're definitely kind of we're redigging in on compliance because we found some issues with schools recently on their overall compliance year over year, and we're really wanting to ensure that schools are, doing the day-to-day work to make sure that the organizational aspects, whether it's reporting, board governance, those are kind of being encouraged at the school level, and that folks that are either attending board meetings know what's going on. Compliance aspects are being taken care of, because what we are finding right now is that schools that are maybe struggling organizationally are also having issues on financial or academic aspects of the school. And so, the organizational piece is one of the things that we're seeing that is kind of a leading indicator where maybe issues may arise in other areas of the school. So I'm happy to take any questions. I think I see a hand raised there, Angela. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if, when you said that you wanted agendas to be detailed, do you need the agenda to be detailed, or do you need the support materials that are included with the agenda?
So the agenda should be detailed. Not that it needs to be a whole narrative in the agenda, but there shouldn't be just general topics of, principal's report. That can be the title of that item, but within that, there should be sub bullets of what that report will include, right? Financial report. There should be bullet points of items of which are going to be discussed at that meeting regarding those specific financial items. And so that way, a member of the public who is looking at this agenda has a clear understanding of what is going to be discussed and that way that will allow them to choose whether or not they're gonna to attend the meeting or not.
Thank you. As a follow-up, can you please provide a school's agendas that does that to the specificity that you would?
I think
because I mean, I've been involved with many board meetings on many schools in this network, and I've never seen something like that. So I just need an example.
So
Angela.
a good, oh, I was just, is that Melissa?
Yeah, I was going to say, we are doing an OML training that will get into some like very specific examples, but I don't assume that just because Danny's saying this, that like your school is having problems. I think like a couple other good examples are like calendar, right? Like, well, that's very different than like the school will approve their calendar for the 25-26 school year, right? Like it's not like a whole bunch of information, but it's just a tiny bit more specific so that people understand, are we talking about the, NIA sports calendar, or are we talking about our calendar for next year? Are we talking about the testing calendar, right?
Yeah.
So it's stuff like that. Or like we've seen schools put like finances and then they approve their budget, right? Like that's
Got it.
way different than, you just.
I think
Yeah.
a good way to kind of think about it is to take a step back and view the agenda as somebody who, a parent, right? Who may be aware of what's going on at the school, but maybe not the day-to-day stuff. And if I'm a parent or a member of the public and I'm looking at this agenda, does what is listed on that agenda, would it be clear to this person of what's actually going to be talked about at the meeting? And if it appears unclear, providing a little more context in those agendas is just really helpful to members of the public so that they understand kind of what's going on at any given meeting, which then gives them the ability to kind of choose, do I need to go to the meeting or not? And so that's one of the things that we're going to be keeping an eye on. And that's part of the quality indicators. This is all for 25, 26, but we really want to kind of have schools kind of have more context within their agendas so that if I'm just an interested person who would like to attend, I have an idea of what action is going to be taken at that meeting and what's going to be discussed, even on items that maybe are not actionable, but have there should be some context there so that, it's not overly broad. And a good example of agendas that have been more clear and concise are the SPCSAs. Like back in the day, we used to have executive director report and there'd be no items there. And in consultation with the AG's office, they recommended that we provide a bulleted list of what Melissa or Rebecca would have talked about at that, because that keeps the items within the OML compliance and the guidelines. Other questions? I'm more than happy to take any of them. Okay, I will turn it back over to you, Katie.
All right, thank you, Danny. We're going to move to the financial performance framework next. The financial performance framework maintained the 8 indicators that were there previously, and then we added some additional ones, and we made some tweaks to the 8 we had. Some of the questions that guided the development of the revisions, again, was, does the FPF measure what's required by law? Does it align with the NACSA best practices? Does it consider the unique context of Nevada's charter schools? And does it provide clear and timely information regarding the financial health of the school? So I'm next going to hand it over to Mike Dang, who's really going to talk about, and again, focus on sort of the changes and updates to the framework based on the new version. So Mike, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Katie, and welcome everybody. It's good to be here with you. And certainly feel free to give us a call afterwards regarding any specific questions. But first of all, on this slide, one of the changes that we made is to add additional context to help the schools understand better what we're looking for and what they're responsible for, what the expectations are. As Danny mentioned, the financial related metrics were moved from the OPF over to the financial performance framework. And we added a financial oversight metric also. Slight modifications were made to two of the standard measures, the enrollment variance and the total margin, and aggregated 3-year total margin. And also another change is that before, if a school had, when we had 8 measures, if a school had 3 does not meet standards ratings, they would be subject to a notice of concern or a more serious intervention, or if they got 1 falls far below standards. With the new 13 measures now, if a school gets 4 does not meet standards or 1, so 4 instead of the 3, they would be subject to a notice. Next slide, please. Okay, let's see, for the starting point is basically we're looking at the financial well-being and health and performance of the school. And as you probably recall, we talked about this, that the schools have autonomy in how they manage things, but they're accountable, of course, in terms of how they manage things. And SPCSA is responsible for oversight for how the schools are managing their finances. And the framework is a tool to identify the schools that to confirm, hopefully, that they're doing well, or if there are any financial difficulties to identify that. The next slide, please. This next slide shows the 3 ratings, and a school could get 2 or 3 ratings depending on the measure. The meet standards, does not meet standards, or falls far below standards. Next slide, please. So this one just repeats what we talked about earlier, the 1 indicator with the falls far below, or the 4 does not meet standards. So let's go to the next slide. And on the next slide, now we're going to look at these near-term measures. This has not changed. This, in terms of the ratio itself, they're looking at basically how much cash you have or had at the end of the year and accounts receivable that would be turning to cash quickly within the year, and then what liabilities you had that would be amounts that you would owe in the year. And does the amount you have on hand, is that enough to cover the amounts that you're liable for in that coming year? So no change there. Next slide, please. Thank you. Let's say on this one, we're looking at how many days can your school keep paying its bills at its average daily pay rate and still have enough cash, enough cash to the first of the month, but when you're going to get your next pay, or if you're getting reimbursed. But the standard is, as you can see there, anywhere from 60 to 120 days. The minimum is 60 days. Year 1 schools, it's not that it's okay to be at 15 days or more, but it's just that we know it can be difficult to get up and running. So we set it at 15 or more for year 1 schools, year 2 schools at 30 days or more. And then by year 3, we expect the schools to be at 60 days or more. The next slide, please. This enrollment variance has adjusted. We've moved that up a little bit to 90%, and that ties in with your contracts also. As you know, the enrollment variance enrollment is so critical. And as you can see there with the formula actual enrollment versus the projected enrollment, the assumption is, of course, that you are building your budget based on your projected enrollment. And if that actual enrollment falls too far short, if you don't make adjustments to your operating plan and expenses, that could flip you underwater pretty quickly. So that's why this is an important metric. So the next slide, please. Looking at this, we're looking at basically if your in default on anything. And we're looking at PERS also, so just to be aware of that. Want to make sure you're paying your bills, especially your PERS, for the sake of your employees, of course, and law. Next slide, please. And then, so we're going to look at the longer term measures now, the sustainability measures. Next slide. Thank you. Let's see, so now we're looking at whether you spent less than you took in during the year. We're looking at it for just that year, but also, as you see, the aggregated 3-year total to make sure that the school is managing its operations such and its revenue generation so that it's got a surplus at the end of the year, or at the very least is breaking even. And this is something that if you dive into state law, you're going to start seeing laws and regulations regarding not being operating at a deficit. So let's go to the next slide, please. And by the way, just so you know, on that last slide, the change there was, it's a little more lenient than it was before. Before it was a break even, but now it's, okay, you can have a little bit of a loss in an operational sense where your revenues may be slightly less than your expenses. But if your assets are less than your liabilities, that is actually where we draw the line. And even with the operating deficit, we will be talking to you about that to make sure in the next year that you're able to get back in the surplus. Next slide, please. Let's see. So for cash flow, now basically that's a pretty simple one. It's not your standard, let's say, for-profit industry or nonprofit cash flow. This one is basically looking at whether your ending cash balance is greater than your prior year's ending cash balance. The idea, of course, is that you're continuing to build cash up. Now, if your cash goes down, what we want to see is to see if it's essentially planned for, is to see the minutes from your board meeting showing that there was, let's say, a plan to build up your cash reserves or your cash, let's say to put a down payment on a school. And then when the cash balance goes down, to be able to see from your minutes, okay, that this was planned for. Next slide, please. So the debt or lease service coverage ratio, this is the last of the standard measures or the measures that we've had before. And this one here, we're looking at seeing how the school did in making its lease payments or its debt payments if you had a mortgage. Either way, we're looking for that. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're going to look at those financial management measures, primarily which came over from the OPF side. Your annual audit, that is due on December 1. And that is something we encourage schools to set up their audit engagement letters early, as early as April, but definitely no later than August, to get those set up, to get your agreement with your auditor. And it's really important to get your material, your financial material to your auditors as soon as possible. Typically, they're going to have multiple schools sending in their information, and it can result, if you don't get them your information on time, it can result in delayed audits. And when you work with your auditor, they're going to tell you how much time they're going to need when you need to get the information in. And if the information is incorrect or insufficient, they're going to be getting back with you too. Next slide, please. So remember that December 1 date, by the way. So on the financial reporting and compliance, we're looking now at how well the school is complying with the laws and regulations and things like this, like the budget and things like that. When they're getting turned in, for example, you're going to be responsible to turn in a tentative budget and a final budget, and then you may need to, during the year, turn in an amended final budget. For example, if your enrollment is, let's say, 80 or 95%, 90%, you may want to submit an amended budget to show that you're still going to operate at a surplus, and also reflecting that you had to make some operational changes, quarterly and other financial statements. Next slide, please. So for financial oversight, basically we're monitoring the board to make sure that the board is monitoring the school. We tell schools that we, as the authorizer, basically operate at about a 30,000 foot level when we get your information, but that the boards are responsible completely in the financial area, but especially at the ground level. You're the ones that are responsible for checking bank statements, credit card statements, debit statements, things like this to make sure everything's clean and proper down at the ground level. Next slide, please. The chart of accounts, we are required to use, all the schools are required to use the chart of accounts, and that's the NDE chart of accounts. Ideally, you're using the chart of accounts when you're setting up your chart of accounts. And in fact, NDE has been moving in the direction of requiring everybody to set up their chart of accounts using the NDE chart of accounts. In the past, schools have used as many as they could, and they may have had a few variances, but NDE is moving in the direction of using their chart of accounts completely. So be mindful of that and do all you can. Now, if you break up things, you might have like a different campus, multiple campuses, so you might have a 0.1 or 0.2, but you still want to try and use their chart of accounts codes at the core. Next slide, please. Now, the grant subrecipient compliance, that is an area that the grants management team covers, and that is Jen Bauer's team. So you'll ultimately be working with them. And as you know, in that area, you've got a lot of federal laws and rules and regulations, including their audits, and they may come and do desk audits of what you have at your campus. In addition, you may be subject to a single audit depending on how much federal funds you receive. Next slide, please. Okay, are there any questions anyone has? Okay, I guess not, Katie.
All right, thank you, Mike. So we'll finish up by just kind of outlining again the timeline of this. So I kind of started with this, but I want to finish with this. So the school year 2023-2024 performance framework results will be evaluated based upon the previous iteration of the framework. So that was last school year, will be on the framework that was adopted and in place last school year. We're going to do the academic framework results at the SPCSA board meeting in November. The organization will be presented at the SPCSA board meeting next Friday. And then the financial framework will be presented in either January or March of 2025 after the audits have been submitted on December 1st. The current framework that we just reviewed are in place for this school year. So those results will be rolled out for the first time next fall. And so you'll see results based on the framework we just reviewed next fall. As I said, this slide deck has multiple links for resources. I'll send out the slide deck that has a link, has all these links in it, and then I'll also send you all of our contact information. And then we are doing recordings of these. We're going to send out the best one once we're all finished. And we recommend sharing that with all your board members and other relevant stakeholders who might need this information in order to effectively run their school. The last slide I have just again outlines all the various links to the documents that we've talked about, the technical guide, and then other additional resources that we think will be helpful to you as you go through kind of this process and you learn, you kind of dig into these frameworks. If you have questions beyond this that come up, feel free to reach out again to any of us, and we're happy to kind of help answer the questions. Otherwise, again, I just thank you all for joining us this late on I don't even know what day of the week it is, Wednesday, Tuesday. And we appreciate your time and thank you for joining us. Have a great rest of your evening.
Bye, everybody.